Okay, so,
Okay,
good evening, everyone.
just meant she is not showing up as an attendee. So let me try and tell her to.
Is there a panelist? She said it was saying you can't enter as a panelist. And that's what it told me.
Then how did you get in?
I said to her, all right, you send me the link that you have. Let me try it. So she sent me it by email.
You got in as Tony Gelber.
Yeah, which is crazy.
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't, absolutely not.
Next month, maybe we can do this in person. Then
You
you
know,
can score it will rain.
You know what we could do? But that room in the Village Regatta is so small, but maybe we could go, the library basement has a couple of nice, decent sized rooms.
Or the courthouse.
Yeah,
I
or the
think we were
courthouse.
past the courthouse tonight.
It says this, I have this, that there's 9 participants, so there must be some people,
You're right.
yeah, I see Ruben's there.
Elsa
Hey,
is
Ruben.
showing up as an attendee. Dan, can you promote her as an attendee?
Not showing up as an attendee on my thing, so I can't promote her.
Can one of us promote her? No.
Oh, okay, that may, okay, just a minute, now I can, hold on. She just showed up.
Rob Stark is joining us,
Yeah, I see.
former committee member.
I don't know why she's not, did not letting me.
Does she have her video closed and her sound closed? That's
Okay.
possible.
I see her sound is she's on mute.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
So
she made her,
Lisa is also there.
Lisa,
Lisa
Acevedo.
Acevedo is there,
there's Elsa,
is there.
Hi.
but she's not a,
Sammy is there and Yazur is there. Okay.
hello, Catherine Parker.
Hi, Catherine.
Hey, Tony. Good to see everyone.
Yeah, we've had a little technical difficulty here, so trying to work through it. All right, let's.
No worries.
So Elsa, glad you, thank you for sending me my link somehow. I don't know how that happened, but all right, let's hit the road here.
Yep.
The Zoom road. So welcome everyone to the February 15th, 2022 meeting, and happy Valentine's Day +1, right? Catherine, I know you have to go shortly, so.
No, a change of plans for me. So
Oh.
I'm staying with you.
Oh, thank
cool.
you.
Great, thank you very much.
So,
And obviously you got a link, right? You got the link to get in. Who sent you the link, Peggy? Sally?
It just said treasurer.
Oh,
In
maybe,
the
okay.
treasurer's office, yeah.
Okay. All right, so we're just gonna go through the agenda. So our mayor is trying to set up a meeting with the Army Corps, and he thinks probably mid-March. And he basically asked, told me, and I shared it with Peggy so far, that, he will have some of the flood committee members at the meeting, so that's great. He also asked that we try to streamline the agenda. So Peggy and I thought maybe we could work on that a little bit later in the meeting. And other than that, we don't know anything else. So that's where we are on that.
okay, Tony, can I ask a question?
Yes.
You shared, as I understand it, the committee has shared the list of questions that the committee had with the Corps. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, because my understanding is that they are working on trying to answer those or being prepared to answer them.
Great.
That would be great. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, so I mean, Peggy and I thought we could just move stuff around, kind of, major bullet points and minor bullet points, stuff like that. So
There's one that I actually thought would be easy to squish down, which is the the basic costs associated with raising a home and who covers what. And maybe we don't have to go to all that detail when we send them the agenda and just say various questions about raising, who covers what in raising homes or something like that. And that takes care of A through H. So like a whole bunch of questions within a question, and we can just shorten that up. I kind of, and I did say this to Tony, and we'll go through this later, but this list was compiled from both the committee and the public input. So I'm a little leery to cut it back. And if you're saying that the Corps is already working on it, then I think we should leave it where it is.
I'm told they are, but I don't have, I would call hard intelligence on it. But in conversations that I have with the Corps, sometimes it shifts to this, and then I get feedback saying, yes, we have the list, and
Great,
I understand that people are working on it.
that's amazing.
That would be great. Okay. All right, item 4, then capital projects. So Mayor Murphy, Peg, and I met Richard Dionisio, the mayor of Harrison, and 2 of their new flood, well, they have a
To be put together flood committee.
right. So we met 2 of their members on the road to nowhere. And then our mayor found, I guess, through the village, some of the original plans to do the removals, which he sent to Harrison. Did you see the response? There was a response from Richard today, Peggy. Did you just now?
No,
All right. So the response basically is that Leonard Jackson, I guess, did a report on that a long time ago, and it's honestly, it's not a clear-cut answer like, yes, you can tear the road down. No, you can't. So I think what I'll do is I'll just say that I'll share that with our members, and then we can discuss it. But it's, I read it just right before the meeting, and I'm, like I say, it's basically talking about how much it would impact flood control, and I couldn't see like, yes, tear it down or don't tear it down. So I don't want to make a commitment like that.
this is something we also may want to ask the Corps to weigh in on,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
they were very in favor of trimming it back, and the sooner we could do it, they said, the better it would be for everyone. And that
Okay.
was Paul Tominello who said that to me, and Dan was standing there when he said that. So we may want to separately memo out to them, could they please opine on trimming the road back 20 feet? or
Okay.
20,
Yeah,
whatever.
there was basically 2 parts in it. One said shorten the Glendale Road, and the other part is lower the channel invert for 350 feet downstream for Glendale Road. That's the 2 phases they kind of said. I mean, it's a huge memo, but like right in front, there's
Well, the
those 2 things.
phase, the phase that we could afford would be simply to trim it. We can't channel it. That would be the Corps.
Okay. All right. So I'll share it, and then we can discuss it. All right. My item for our item 5. So I had sent I think it was after maybe our January meeting, I had sent a PowerPoint around of pictures I took. And then the following weekend, I went and took pictures of Grove Street and what's the big hill there on my brain? And another one of the crossings of the silt. And then I sent it to USDA also. So Paula Bagley looked at it, and her initial response is that their criteria, she didn't send this to me in writing, but I asked her to join us, but unfortunately she couldn't. So anyway, her response was that according to their guidelines, everything she sees in my pictures will not imminently cause additional flooding. Those were kind of her words. So I don't know, when Peggy and I spoke about this last night, Peggy said maybe we should have the village try to pursue it. You want to weigh in, Peg?
Well, my feeling is, and everybody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think communication should be between USDA and the manager's office. And then they can ask the most appropriate and technical questions, and they can report back to us as to why it may not meet USDA standards. I don't think, unfortunately, Tony, I think you got put in a weird spot there. I don't think you should be the one communicating with them.
Yeah, and it's probably my fault for CCing her on the email, but it's fine. So Dan, what's your recommendation here?
I,
Thoughts?
I, thi- I think it should go through the village office. Um, You know, and I think that what I think it has to be targeted for what they are allowed to do, which is moving of Ida, material, within the riverbanks. And there's a lot of material still there. And if your pictures have documented that, I think we should try and identify maybe where the locations are. And I suggest to Jerry that if it's, that it would be probably helpful if we could set up a meeting with them on site during the week and walk the area and see what their reaction is to be able to fund it.
Well, one of the things they told us was that they would not remove silt. So unfortunately, Tony, if you show them the silt buildup at the Grove Street overpass, that might be why she's saying no. And if we could get more pictures of just trees that are down, couches that are in the river and that sort of thing, we might get a better reaction. So maybe we should do a river walk and take pictures of just that kind of debris.
Well, I have lots of slides. If you want, I can try to put it up. And you want to do it? You want to look at it right now?
It's fine. And then we could send that to the village manager's office. Maybe save a step.
All right, let me just give me a second here.
You're gonna have to share screen first.
I have to open up the document. All right, so can you see, everybody see this?
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm just gonna zip through. Okay, so I started at Fenimore on the Sheldrake, and basically my title is right, Ida debris, blah, blah. And then I walk,
So I think you need to take silt out of your title.
okay, got it. This was just the next one. I just walked up and took pictures. And then this is this is the getting into almost Columbus Park, all the stuff in the riverbed itself,
Mhm.
all the debris and branches, and the duck was just an innocent
Hey, the duck
bystander.
can be there?
That's a polluting duck. Yeah, this was horrible. So then this is kind of the confluence and some erosion, because remember, they did say they would do some stuff with erosion.
No, they're not going to do erosion.
I don't think they are.
All right,
All
well,
the only monies that they have that the village would qualify is debris removal.
Right, like that yellow barrier in the river is perfect. The junk by the duck is perfect. The junk on the side of the bank is perfect.
okay. And then this is the channel right before the railroad bridge, right? So you
Yeah,
get a
but
whole bunch.
They're not gonna do that.
But
They're not
this
gonna
is,
do anything where they have to take out silt and plant material, I don't think.
all right. This is a pallet.
Yep,
This was along the railroad, which probably may not, but there were trees that just fell right down.
Yep.
This is facing the railroad bridge. This little area got washed out, the path.
do that.
This is Barry Avenue.
Tire in the road, definitely,
Yeah.
in the river. Elsa, can you get behind Maria's house? There's a couch in the river right behind Maria's house. Maybe you can walk over and get a picture.
Yeah, this is
Yeah,
obviously
this is
road.
what they won't do.
Yeah, and then this is a lot. I thought she said that they would do washout, but I may be misremembering.
No, they're not, they're only going to take debris materials.
Right.
That's all they are doing.
Okay,
But Tony, may I make a suggestion? These are really good pictures of the Grove Street Bridge. I would send these to the village manager separately, because what we had asked the village to do was silt removal, and this is perfect to demonstrate to them how bad this is.
all right. So let's see what else. We have more. This one I didn't edit, obviously. This is that little park by Grove Street.
Yep.
All right, and then the rest of this is just, this is the, you know, and I did housing stuff. All right, so so here's what I'll do. I'll send a shortened so Dan, should I send the shortened version to you or to Jerry?
Send it directly to, what I would do is send it to Jerry with copies to the committee, including myself.
Okay,
And Dan Sarnoff.
okay. All right, great.
And what I would do is make sure that the email should say, here are pictures of some of the Ida debris that's still remaining in the rivers, which the program specifically is aimed at moving. And it would be helpful to set up a meeting to walk this with the appropriate representative to see how we can move the funding request forward. Something to that effect, Tony.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And also, if you could maybe get that picture to throw in of the couch, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I seen that couch. When the tide is very low, you can sit on it.
Yes, you can.
How's it comfortable?
A little wet.
It's a little soggy.
It was
Okay.
right outside my apartment window when I was in the condo, and I could see it every day. So I know it's there.
All right, okay. The floodplain easement, I don't know. I don't really have any further information on that. That program. Any thoughts on? I don't know how or what to do, if anything, with that one. So any ideas from anybody?
My concern is that they were talking about it needed to be at least 5 to 10 homes per neighborhood in order for it to pay to do. And I can't imagine you're going to get, after people have already rebuilt, that you're going to get 5 or 10 people that are going to be willing to say, yeah, I'm in.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought that. Yeah.
Bounce that back to the village manager's office.
So on that point, Peg, where the Baptist church is on whatever that is, Nostrand or
Howard,
I think if you take just that side of the river, there are maybe 5 houses there. So we would have to, yeah, I know, I'm just saying.
that
So
that
we
might
have-
be the case. I think
might-
that should come to the village manager's office, and they should maybe send a letter out and see if there's interest.
All right.
Dan, do you disagree?
Dan, yeah, what do you think, Dan?
I think we'd have to carefully craft a letter that can't be misinterpreted that you're trying to get rid of families. Okay, so I'd be very concerned that it has to be artfully worded. And I would suggest that maybe that's something, people on this committee could work on and then send a draft to the manager's office. I'm concerned that,
To be reviewed by council.
there are implications that people read into things that aren't intended. And that creates more hysteria, which is what we don't want to do.
Right,
Why it might be better to have the village manager's office craft a letter saying that this may be a possibility if a group of homes wishes to do that, and they should contact the manager's office for further information, something rather vague.
right. Has there been any interest in the past in kind of either raising homes in that area or?
The only people that raised homes, 2 of us did it at the same time in 2014. The Whittemores did it on, I think they're on Howard or Lester, I can't
Yeah,
remember
I
which.
think, yeah.
And we all looked into buyouts at the time, and there was no way that it made any financial sense to do it, but the rules were different then.
Right.
So, but I think it's much safer and smarter for us to appeal to the village, the board and the manager's office to put something together and go after it that way. I don't think we should be setting ourselves up to anything where we could make a mess.
Okay. All right. Any updates on your ticket there, Miss Catherine?
My only update is I had a very good conversation with Noam Bramson, the mayor of New Rochelle, about Liswick, the Long Island Sound Watershed Intermunicipal Council, and getting that going. I called Noam first because Chuck Strom, who's the city manager for New Rochelle, is the current head of Liswick. And so I felt it was important that Noam was on board to at least have a conversation amongst everyone as part of Liswick to, but you know, if he's on board, then we have a better chance of getting it going. And he was, although I did hear, you know, a little bit of some concerns that, as I told you from the last time it met, which was the situation where every municipality for himself. I also talked to my new chair of our Board of Legislators, and two updates with that. One, I'm going to be the new ex officio to the county's Stormwater Advisory Board. And two, you know, I have an invitation to use our county committee room facilities to have a, you know, Liswick meetings. So I can offer that as, you know, in addition to, you know, obviously, if we need to have virtual meetings, you know, we can help with that as well. So so that's the update with what I was working on since our last meeting. And I haven't, I apologize, I've had a lot of other things going on. My next conversation is with Chuck, and that'll be very, very soon, probably in the next day or two, but it hasn't been as yet.
An ex officio, what does that mean for?
So a voting member of the county's Stormwater Advisory Board, an elected position, elected for an elected official for the county.
So you're going to just vote yes on things we think that you think are appropriate. I said.
Since you mentioned it, and another bit of news too is that, so the Stormwater Advisory Board, they were supposed to be meeting this week. They have not met since November. I did get an email from our Department of Planning, which is actually the one that you know, leads that Stormwater Advisory Board. They've asked for one more month before the group meets, because they sort of had a to-do list from that last meeting in November, and they're making headway on it. And so they felt if it could be pushed back one more month, that would be very productive. So that will happen. And also, just as you mentioned, voting members, a couple of voting members that I think will be important. Nancy Seligson, former supervisor of the town of Mamaroneck, has been on the county's Stormwater Advisory Board. Certainly, she's fairly up to speed on what's been happening in the village. So I think that that's very good. And anyway, so that's kind of the update from the county perspective.
May I ask
Well-
a question?
Sure.
I'm sorry, Dan, were you going to say something?
Go ahead.
Is there also a county-wide flood committee still in existence?
No, I mean, well, the Stormwater Advisory Board is that countywide.
Because at one point there was a county-wide flood committee.
At one point, and then so what the work that they did was kind of leading up to this. So they completed that original task. Now it's the Stormwater Advisory
Right.
Board.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So If, Tony, if I may, I have a couple questions for Catherine. You know, most of the stormwater regulations say you can't discharge more water than is currently being discharged for any development. There is a move on in many areas of people who are concerned about the flooding to change that to that you can, that i.e. you have to reduce it by either 10% or 20%. So if so whatever is happening now, you have to do less than that, you know, if you develop. And it would be helpful to if that concept could get to the stormwater board, because I know even in our own regulations, we just simply say, if you know, you can't be worse than what you are now. But the problem is everything is worse.
Yes, right.
You know,
Makes
everything
perfect
is bad
sense.
now. So, you know, saying that we're going to keep it the same doesn't really help.
Right.
Plus, you have a
So,
massive project potentially coming in White Plains where Ridgeway was.
so just getting back to Dan's point, I'd be happy to share that initially with Dave Kavinga from our county planning department. I'd like him to eyeball it, and then also, you know, from him, then have it go out to all the stormwater advisory board members.
You know, people have to buy into it. The question is, you know, to see if there are people who are receptive to it and then to pursue it. The second is I sent an email out to everybody this morning. Last night, the Board of Trustees did agree to pursue the river gauges in our 3 rivers, not 2 rivers or 3 rivers.
Great.
And one of the questions that came up is there any grant monies available, you know, to help either the installation or the maintenance? I'm more concerned about the maintenance than the installation at this point. But the question is whether or not the county has a program that for flood control or flood, you know.
Yeah, I think we can talk, maybe have a further conversation on this offline, Dan. Why don't we
Okay.
touch base tomorrow morning?
Yeah.
And I'd be happy to see
Yeah,
what we can do with that.
It just seems it's been a long haul of doing this.
Mhm.
It's something that if I had my druthers, and I have lots of dreams, is to get all the upstream communities to do the same thing, i.e. instead of just Mamaroneck putting 3 gauges, the more further upstream that we can get earlier warnings from, everybody benefits from that approach of knowing, you know, saying, okay, we have a real problem, not just thinking about it, it's here, what do we do?
Absolutely. Yeah,
So-
I agree.
You know,
I
and
agree.
that's something that the village can't, every time we make comments to other communities, the road to nowhere being accepted, it's taken as an invasion of somebody's turf as opposed to what the message is. So shoot the messenger, not the, you know,
Yeah,
and not pay attention to them. But that may be something that the county and you might be able to be help, you know, start a conversation on. Because the beauty of the program that we're pursuing or have agreed to pursue is that it ties into a data bank where you can have either or both a text or an email that is set at whatever elevations you want of the river rising, saying the river is, you know, has passed a, you know, high percentage of flooding. You know, it's, you know, and it keeps, and the information is updated every 15 minutes, you know, which, you know, and it is really, you know, particularly if we could get this further upstream, I mean, the village would be a real benefit, but it would also help everybody else understand issues. It also helps tie people together to try to work together. So, you know, I'm a dreamer and, you know, that's one of my dreams.
right. No, I think it's so that again, this is a little bit off the top of my head, but look, originally with the storm, all these stormwater reconnaissance plans, the hope at the county was that municipalities would kind of come together and make these requests, not for just an individual municipality, but they would do it sort of, as a group. And, again, going back to Liswick, that's something that I bring up every meeting. If we had something like that, and all 14 members of Liswick advocated that this was a project that they wanted to support for all of their streams as being part of the coastal Long Island Sound watershed, I think that this would be something that seems very, very reasonable. Again, I'm speaking as Catherine Parker. Seems very reasonable. I think it's within keeping for what the stormwater reconnaissance plans and how the county has acted with the money that they've set aside. So I'd like to see what we can do with that.
Well, anything we can do to help and nudge, and I guess Tony and Peggy, when you talk to the new mayor in Harrison, you might mention that as well as a side, as a side segue to other things, because part of the problem is controlling flooding, and we're not going to be able to do that until a lot more is done. So then the question is, how do we warn people?
Yeah.
So Dan, just, is there a name to the system that you're recommending or installing, or?
There is a name, but I don't have it. We're just referring to it as river gauges, and that's how it's always been referred to. But the difference is the information used to go to the government agency. It wasn't tied into an early warning system. Now it's tied into a notification system. And we can tie that into, if you think about it, we have the fire, the fire horn, which is still operative. And, we have a control center, and it could come into Village Hall. And if it goes beyond so many inches, it can, like the air raid siren, it can do whatever.
And also the village can then blast out on an email blast or a phone blast that this is coming.
Right. Okay.
Those green alarm cone things are still around the village. And years ago, those sirens would go off before floods actually hit. So there are ways to get that done.
That's interesting. All right, so I guess the reason I asked Dan was, and being that Catherine was talking about communications, we did get a little blurb put in the village newsletter. Did people see that? Else I see some head shaking. So I was thinking that for this week, I could write a very short paragraph with maybe that as one of the updates, and then make a little bit more, I'm not sure what else I would put in, but would it be all right if I mentioned that, Dan?
Sure. It was brought up in the work session, which is a public meeting,
Okay,
and the board, conceptually agreed to it.
Tony, I think it's great to have one concise, something is moving forward.
right. That's all I'm saying. Yeah,
Yeah.
just, yeah.
Fine.
Yeah, but I would say the village has agreed to, try and get an early warning system for flooding installed through river gauges and messaging,
Okay, great.
something like that. Okay.
Okay. All right. All right, Catherine, anything else before I shut you down? Okay, all right. So then, Peggy, we had talked about maybe discussing, I know at the last meeting, we didn't really get to the low-hanging fruit memo,
Finish low-hanging fruit. Yep,
right? So did we want to start to look at that again?
certainly can. Did we go out, and I'm just asking because I don't remember if anything has happened. Did we go out to the village on the first? We did. in a memo that the first 4 points we wanted them to look at,
Yes,
right?
correct. And I think the
Did
fourth,
that get brought up at any meetings? So the first floor would be regularly scheduled maintenance to clean from the DPW to go into the river to clean debris. Consistent schedule for the vac truck, the choke points that need to be dredged, or whatever the new non-4-letter word of dredging is, and the river gauges. So the river gauges, we've actually gotten one done, but the other 3 that we had requested, any traction on that?
Did we also request, about the village floodplain administrator and who that is? And,
yeah,
That's still on low hanging fruit without, wasn't our first 4 points.
right, yeah.
okay.
And
So the question is, Dan, was that ever addressed, the other 3 points?
It hasn't been presented by the manager's office, if that's what you're asking.
So I think we need to go back and ask that again, plus add new points. Because I think we have to be squeaky wheels on this.
so Dan, I'm just going to phrase this question kind of carefully. It seems like the last time I was on the flood committee, we had made a lot of progress on, getting we had the Menzie mucker, and there was a priority list for removing stuff from different manholes or person holes. I'm not sure what you say nowadays. And now what I hear is that kind of routine doesn't happen that often. So is there a reason for that? I mean, have we lost staff or funding, or, because it seems like the members on this committee have been asking for that continually before I just got back on again. So I'm just wondering what's the obstacle here? Is it that, like I say, it seems like it was happening 5 years ago. So did we lose funding? Did we lose staff? Did we lose, sometimes you lose a few key people who know how to do things, and all of a sudden it doesn't happen anymore. So any clue to that? I mean, maybe there's a better way.
Let me jump in for a sec just to fill in some background for you. For a few years, the village did not have a vac truck, and they were contracting it out to Cook. And the programs weren't, it wasn't done consistently where it needed to be. About, I'd say a year ago, maybe a little bit more, we got a vac truck, maybe like a year and a half ago. We actually bought a vac truck, and somebody on staff knows how to run it. But what we were asking for specifically was, before large storms, which we have warning are going to come, that the vac truck go back into each of the hot spots and clean them out to try and get ahead of as much as we can. And that really has not gone, that's gone unanswered, if that makes sense.
Well, the question was brought up in the 2 things that happened. One is the vac truck, along with a lot of other equipment, had been winterized, and therefore was not before Ida had.
Winterized on September the 1st?
Yes, before Ida hit, it was winterized. That was part of the problem. And after Ida, the truck was damaged, right? So I think a more appropriate approach is to say, we know that started, I know got interrupted by COVID and other things, but, can you share with us the schedule and the approach for, pre-storm, work and, year-round work?
And if need be,
Just ask for the schedule.
before a storm, so that if the truck is not working, somebody else can make sure these areas get addressed.
So I don't believe it was a staff shortage, but there were issues. Okay.
So the question becomes, how do we get it back onto a normal operating
what-
procedure.
That's by asking for a schedule.
And then also pre-storm, in case of the piece of machinery not operating, that we have a contingency plan in place for Cook or
You
someone
know,
else.
and what are the hot spots, not to take care of
There
that.
is a list. No, there is a list of the hotspots.
You have a list. What I'm trying to suggest is you want the village to say, this is what we will be doing and here's how we will be doing it. That's what you're looking for. That's my suggestion. You do it any way you want, but I find that the more tangible you can get
hear
working collectively on specifics, the faster you get answers.
Okay, any discussion about dredging?
Dredging has not been discussed, and the problem with dredging is you need permits, and the permits are not blanket permits, they are permit specific.
But we've been able to get them in the past.
No, you can get them, but nobody is doing that at the moment.
Correct. So Tony, if I could suggest, we should take those great photos you had and put them into our memo to the village to show how bad it really is.
All right, so I'm
Now
gonna,
we can go on to the other 15 points.
all right, so why don't we do this? I'm gonna shorten the PowerPoint, send it to our village manager. I will,
With copies to the committee and to myself.
and to you, correct.
So
I
I
will
can
also-
follow up on it.
I will also say that it's imperative that we work together to get and Peg, you can help me write this, all right? The pre-storm, all that, all these other points.
No problem.
All right? Okay, all right, great. Okay.
I would try to stay away from use of words like imperative, that it's important, you know, and how can we assist to do this?
Okay,
So then the other points from low hanging fruit that we never got to. Were, we really need to get a procedure in place so that a fire truck and a first aid crew can be left in Harbor Heights, because Harbor Heights gets landlocked in these major storms. And as we know, in 2007, someone had a heart attack and died because there was no way to reach them and there was no medical service available. So there was always talk about having a fire truck and a first aid crew up in the heights pre one of these storms. And is there a way that we can make that regular routine policy?
My suggestion is that's something you should write on a softer approach to the fire chief, because that is within their purview, and ask them, is there a way we can work with you to try and set up emergency plans, you know,
Okay,
for these types of issues?
and one to the EMS also?
Yeah.
Okay. The next one was, could high water vehicles or boats be purchased to be used for rescues during a major storm?
We have boats. I don't know that they were deployed. So the boats that were used were call it similar to a Zodiac, a rubber raft type thing.
I saw them pulling them out.
Yeah, but those weren't villages. Those were from other,
Oh, okay.
the boats that the village had, to the best of my knowledge, were never deployed.
So Peg,
But
let's do
because
this.
they were not flat bottom boats.
Peg, I'm gonna suggest that we target two major things. One is the cleanouts via USDA and the village, and then the Harbor Heights emergency equipment for this.
I think the choke points are pretty important, Tony, the dredging.
Okay, well, I was gonna say, I would include that in I know USDA won't do it, but to me, that's part of the cleanouts. So the cleanouts is gonna be what might USDA do? What can the village be doing on a scheduled and pre-storm basis? And how do we proceed? We feel that proceeding with the dredging is important. Look at the
Okay.
pictures of Grove Street.
So, Tony, I think you need to make the USDA, which is the Ida recovery for the, the debris in the rivers.
Mhm.
The cleanouts are the cleanouts of catch basins, which are not the rivers. So it's a different emphasis.
Okay, so one memo on USDA, another memo on the catch basins, the pre-storm,
The
and the
second memo
dredging.
is low hanging fruit still.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, I think you're better off putting it all in one memo, except for the fire department and EMS, which should go directly to them with a copy to the village manager's office. But it should not be going to the village manager.
We can figure that one out, Tony, but I think it's helpful to have Dan's opinions on these different points and where we should target them.
Okay, yeah, no, I agree. That sounds good.
So, Dan, there was another suggestion made after Ida about the village purchasing high water vehicles for rescues.
Part of that, I think, has been done, but I think I'm not quite sure how to approach it. I think it would be better off and more cost effective is suggesting that for the capital budget that 2 or 3 Zodiac type of rubber raft type boats, the inflatables is what they are. It would be appropriate if they could be put on the capital, the capital budget list to, for purchase. The high wheel vehicles is in many ways a misnomer. How high,
High enough?
you're not, it would not have helped in Sandy, it wouldn't have helped in Ida, it wouldn't have helped in Ivory.
Well, they
What-
might,
what-
because
what-
I will
what-
tell you, I was pulled off my front porch in 2007 in an earth mover.
Yes, and they have,
Wheels,
and we-
and the
and
bucket
we-
end came up.
but we already have them. So, and if we buy more, I mean, they're sort of like $300,000 to $400,000 a piece. Okay, and if we can't use them, as part of the normal operation, that's a very big expenditure with a little return.
Right.
By the same token, an inflatable, which is relatively easy to move and very, very light, is much more versatile, regardless whether it's 1 foot or 12 feet of water.
Yep, you're right.
So, I think it should be worded that this might be a more cost-effective approach than other suggestions. Again, trying to be proactive and just not saying, I want.
Catherine?
Yeah, so the village may already be doing this if they are, but in Rye, we were able to get like the amphibious, kind of like a Humvee, $500,000 is what those cost from the military surplus list. So it was like next to nothing for the city of Rye to get that equipment. And that's exactly when we use it, when there are these flood events. So as I say, if, maybe the village is already looking at that, the military
I don't think
surplus list.
I haven't heard in any conversations. I think that's a great one.
It's a really good idea.
If you can get something at a significant reduction, then it makes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, they're getting rid of it and they're offering it to, municipalities. And I think we did it through our police department possibly, but we were able to get some rescue equipment. And then this, as I say, it was like a $500,000 amphibious, Humvee thing. And we use it exactly for rescuing people during floods.
That's great.
Did it cost $500,000 or how much?
No, it cost us, I don't know what it cost us. I think it was literally like a nominal thing to transport it or whatever, get it to Rye. But it was, they were getting rid of it.
And that's a lot, a much larger program too. You could literally buy anything for a police department that, is a little more military in nature. I mean, if, obviously we don't need a tank or anything like it, but you could literally buy something like that from, on the surplus, so.
I might need one. Okay, so I mean, this is helpful. This is really productive. The village, and these are all suggestions that people made right after Ida. So this is a kind of a compilation of all of that. Village should designate specific areas for each flood-prone street as to where they should move their cars in the time of floods. And further, the village should not ticket cars parked in these higher ground spots during the floods or immediately after the storm. But I think if the low-lying areas where Washingtonville, the flats, where they have nowhere to move their cars to because they can't get out in time, or everything is closed, or in the bad case of Ida, where they were doing the bridge over 95 and the only high place you could go to, the bridge was not open and you couldn't go there. But if people knew in advance, if the village could make designated parking zones for flood-prone areas, and people would know, okay, I'm going here, nobody's going to ticket me, that could be very helpful.
That actually was done, not by area, but it was all village, they were specified by the police station, the Hunter lot, behind the movie theater, Spencer Place. A lot of these areas, were said people were told, that were on the email list or the mobile list, you could move your cars there and you would not be ticketed.
Honestly, I don't remember seeing anything like that. I'm not doubting it came through. There was a lot of stuff that came through where there was a lot of rain going down. I just wanted people in advance.
But the idea, the concept is great in saying that, we need to be proactive, and to the extent that we have areas that, can help, that we should be doing that. And
if you live on Waverly, know that you should be bringing your cars here.
Yeah.
And maybe this is something we can do in conjunction with the village as the committee, and then we can distro this information by a mailing or something like that when it's not flooding, so people have the information ahead of time.
I was thinking maybe we could, why don't we, is someone on our committee willing to see if they could find that list of spots that we could talk about next month? Then maybe we could just.
all you have to do is call Sarnoff and he has that list. So if somebody on the committee wants to take that on, that's fine. It's just a simple telephone call.
Elsa, Steve, could you guys, one of you? Elsa, okay, great. Because then, yeah, and then maybe circulate it to us, Elsa. All right, and then maybe we could even put it in the newsletter in a generic way, that here are some spots.
Yep.
That,
I also think maybe we can arrange with the village to do either an email blast or a snail mail blast, so that people can be prepared ahead of time, and put it on the village's website in the flood section. This is where, if you live in a low-lying area, you should think about parking your cars.
Okay. Mhm.
I mean, it sounds silly, but it's not silly when people.
Even
down
here
to
in Shore Acres, we are on Shore Acre,
Yep, Shore Acres Drive.
the drive, and we have to move our cars. So we go to the parkway, and sometimes the parkway is floated too. So it would be very helpful to have a specific spot. That I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, it is a good idea. Okay, cool.
No containers should be permitted in any flood zones at any time unless they have been securely anchored in place. I think the committee unanimously felt that this should be made into a mandate for the village of Mamaroneck.
We already have it in our laws.
Excuse me?
We already have it in
Okay,
our,
enforced in our laws. Then.
well, that's a different issue.
But I think we need to reiterate this because there's still stuff in the park. There are still trailers in the park.
Does
So I
somebody,
think we
want-
need to
is
tackle it.
somebody, is,
I thought the Fuller trailer had been removed.
Has it, the last time I drove past, the Fuller trailer was still there. I can't swear that it hasn't.
It was supposed to have been removed. I was told
I think it's gone, Peg.
Is it?
2 weeks ago.
But we need a policy that it just doesn't happen again.
No, you have a law. You don't need a
We
policy.
need
You
to
have a law.
enforce the law.
So we should be enforcing the law. That's an easy thing to suggest.
Okay,
All right, well, Steve, would you take a ride around the village and see if you can find any and take a picture and a location, and we'll put another PowerPoint together and say, hey, what are these containers doing waiting for the next flood?
I mean, was there more, I mean, I remember the containers in the parking lot. Were there other ones around as well?
no, it was really just in that one area.
Okay,
I mean,
no problem.
I think we should take a ride around, look at any place like in the flats in Washingtonville.
Mhm.
What's there that shouldn't be there? Because people use these containers for storage. So what are you saying, Dan? If I think if Steve, if you would take a ride, just get some pictures and we can look at them and see, okay, how, is this a serious thing or there's just one or two that the village needs to get them out of there?
Okay, I'll take a look.
Yeah, okay, great.
But I think in addition to getting them out of there, if they exist now, it's that we can't put anything back in those spots in the future. And that needs to be reinforced.
Well, I think if we make this kind of a little more front and center, then
Yeah.
everyone will.
If there's something left.
Yeah,
There was a call out that the emergency system did not work properly during the storm. People were calling 3, 4 times, 5 times and couldn't get through. Could there be a backup? Or could the emergency calls go into another town if, maybe they could go into the town of Mamaroneck, since the village of Mamaroneck seems to be a consistent target. Not that the town doesn't get hit, but it doesn't get hit as badly, and the town offices are on higher ground, certainly. And could all emergency announcements be made in English and Spanish in the future? So I think we can, Tony, if you want, we can craft something between the two of us on these other points and send them around to everybody. Steve, there was something you brought up earlier and I thought it was in the memo and it wasn't.
Yeah, it was the village flood administrator.
Right.
who, someplace in my
Floodplain.
notes, I have his name. He's a consultant through an engineering firm.
But by
Okay.
law, the floodplain administrator needs to be on the village payroll and on the village staff.
All right. Is there a citation? Where is that written, Peg? Do you know? I mean,
Yeah, I don't know right off the top of my head. I'll have to go back through my paperwork and see if I can even find that, but somewhere it was written that it's got to be somebody on staff.
all right, see what you can find, and we'll start that process there.
Okay.
All right, so on the agenda, here's what I'm thinking. Peg, why don't you let me take a stab at condensing it? I'll send it to you, you can edit it, and then we'll.
The Army Corps
circulate it.
agenda?
Yeah, the Army Corps.
No, please, no. If they've got it and they're working through it, I think we should leave it.
I'm not saying we're gonna change what they're doing, but I'm saying for the meeting, I'd like to have something that,
It's bullet pointed.
I know, but it's still, you could summarize. I'm gonna take a stab at it and circulate it. You could agree to disagree at that point.
The other thing I thought we should do at the end of our or during our presentation to the Corps is invite them to come in and walk the rivers with us. Because at the end of the day, the people on this committee know the rivers better than anybody else. And I think it's time, if I've done it in the past with the Corps, when we first started the project in 2011, when they finally got serious, I guess, about doing it, we actually walked the rivers with the members of the Corps. And I think before they do the designing, they ought to rewalk these rivers with us and see what's changed.
Okay,
Dan,
So-
what do you think about that?
I'm sorry, I was looking up floodplain administrator. What?
Mhm.
Sorry about that.
I'm suggesting that we invite the Corps to walk the rivers with us, because a lot has changed since the last time they walked the rivers with us. And before they get knee deep in the design process, I think they should see all the different work that's been done, all the different building that's been done.
I think that's a great idea. I think you would be, if you get your meeting first before you get a walkthrough.
No, that's what I'm suggesting. During that meeting, we bring this up as another point.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so let's, the minutes from the December 28th meeting. Do I have a motion to approve them? 1, 2, all in favor? Aye. Okay, they're approved. Thank you. All right, so I'd like to just ask.
Tony,
Oh, yes,
Tony,
Dan.
you'd asked for the floodplain administrator. It's section 186-4.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Do we have any comments from the, or questions from the villagers tonight? Villagers out there?
Anybody that's an attendee want to make a comment or ask a question? This is your time.
Oh, so,
We have a couple. Let's do, with your permission, Tony. The first one, whoops, is Lisa. So Lisa, you're allowed to talk.
Hi, this is Liza Acevedo. I am on Winfield Avenue, and I keep hearing a lot of discussions on things and collaborations that are being done downstream, but I kind of wanted to get a better understanding of what's happening upstream. Right now, our house is half elevated, and we kind of have gotten a lot of roadblocks. So I just need to hear a little bit more of what focus and attention is being given to us upstream. And Peggy, I mean, I think you and I are neighbors.
Yes,
If I'm
we've
not
spoken, Liza.
mistaken. Yeah,
So if I can jump in, I think I might have the most amount of information. One of the reasons that this committee wants so badly to meet with the Army Corps is to discuss exactly what's happening north of the North Barry Avenue Bridge in terms of the project. The fact that 21 of our neighbors, you and I included, had water in their living quarters, and the original plan was to elevate 6 to 8 homes, is not enough. So what we really want to beg of the Corps is to extend the project up to the dam.
okay. I had 8 feet of water inside my house, and it was a total loss.
I know.
and
And I've
Lisa,
seen it up in the air. I can see it
Yeah.
from my house.
and
Yeah.
How do you say it, Lisa?
Liza,
Liza. So Liza, I am new to this, to the committee, but I'm promoting, and I think I have to keep a watershed approach, right? And I bugged Catherine about that a little bit, because the Corps, even the last time, didn't promise no flooding at all after the project. And Ida, I think, either had more water, probably more water in a shorter period of time, or the same water. And so I think we really have to get the communication with the villages upstream in both directions, and then start to try to figure out projects that green infrastructure is one of the ones. In fact, I was on a meeting today with the city of New York, who's again pushing green infrastructure. And then there's also, as Peggy said, if the Corps is willing to go up to the dam and the reservoir, you know, we think there's some benefit to enhancing the flood protection, maybe making the reservoir bigger, you know, getting the valves to work. So I think part of this has to be a watershed approach, which unfortunately is going to probably not happen ASAP, but we have to keep at it.
Liza, when you said you were getting roadblocks, what kind of roadblocks are you getting?
so right now we are getting some roadblocks with the village actually, the village buildings department, because we are being forced to go for a zoning variance because our house is non-conforming on the side yards and
Yep.
we went up.
Yep.
So our house right now is maybe about 70% completed on the foundation. It is elevated and I can't move any further. And I don't really want to take too much time, but while we've only been in this home for 6 years, we've been flooded 3 times. We learned from the prior 2 floods, we did not expect a catastrophic flood. And the last 5 months, we sort of have been roadblock after roadblock because we don't know where to go or who to approach to help us resolve these.
So you're telling me that the building department is just saying you have to go to zoning, but not being helpful in that, or what? I'm sorry, I'm lost, Liza.
We went to apply for buildings permits and we were told that we had to go for a zoning. Unbeknownst to what that process would have been, we were told 2 days before the zoning deadline for the March 3rd zoning meeting. And obviously we missed that. So we get to stay homeless an additional month before we get out into the front of the board. So it's been a lot of miscommunication and sort of misguided and misled information. And I'm glad I joined this tonight because I've gotten a lot of names and a lot of individuals that I can reach out to for assistance.
So Liza, they let you elevate and then they told you you had to go to zoning?
Correct. They provided us building permits to elevate and lift the foundation, raise the foundation, but now they say that the house is non-conforming on the side yards. So the other thing that I want to bring up, and I don't know if this is the appropriate time or not, but I feel like there needs to be some form of moratorium put in place to be able to expedite permits for flood damages and flood-related construction. And I feel that we're almost at the 6-month mark where that momentum that was felt in September and October to help residents rebuild has just dissipated.
So Liza, the moratorium you're referring to, I didn't understand what you meant by that.
Some form of moratorium coming from the village that helps homeowners expedite permits in these sorts of cases.
And also your fees should completely be waived.
I've been told that my fees would not be waived because in addition to elevating, we have to reconstruct the home because it was completely devastated. And that would have to be taken into, quote, further consideration.
Dan, is this something that is the board aware of this?
Okay, the board isn't aware of it, but Liza, may I make a suggestion?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The village manager has moved his office to the building department to seek to streamline things. At least that's what his email to the public is about, saying that he's willing to meet with anybody from the public. Since those decisions will get to his desk, it may not get there for a while. My suggestion is that you give them a call. His number is 777-7703 and make an appointment and go see him directly. And then if you don't get things ironed out, let us know and let's see what else we can do. But that's where I would start.
So Dan, can I interrupt here for a second? If it sounds like Liza's having problems, but if she's having problems,
Other people are having problems. I understand.
Yeah. So
Tony, we have big problems that we are trying to solve.
right, and I'm not beating you up at all, or the.
I'm not taking it that.
Okay, good. So I'm just thinking, should we look at this on a little broader perspective? Is there a way to do that? Or do you want Liza to start there? and then get to-
I gotta say, I think Liza needs, I mean, she's in the most dire situation because she's up in the air with a house that's on cribbing, 12 feet up in the air. And this needs to get sorted out quickly. I appreciate that a lot of other people and they need to be.
The only person who can cut through the red tape, if we're able to cut through it, I don't know what's legal and what's not, but the only person who can make decisions where there is flexibility is the village manager. And he is available to the public, at least that's what his emails that he have sent out. So Liza, I know that you're tired of meetings and you're frustrated, and I don't blame you, and I'm not sure that I would have the patience or constraint and positive attitude that you have. But I would try that, and if you can't get anywhere, then give me a call directly and let me see what else I can do.
And I'm sorry, where can I call you directly?
914-698-5678. I don't know that I can help, but I can certainly try and help.
I would love for someone to just hear me out and understand what we've been going through as a family of 5 displaced since September, after we had just been flooded 2 weeks
And
before.
I think, and again, the one person, we have a strong village manager form of government. He is the chief operating officer. If you say, where does the buck stop? The buck stops there. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees. Board of Trustees is not able to act on individual issues like this, but we can help try and change policy if it's, where we can be helpful, but we would be working with the village manager. So I would suggest the best way to start is 914-777-7703. With the village manager, ask for an appointment and tell him it is urgent that you get to see him this week.
And Liza, I would recommend you make the appointment at your house, if you can.
Great, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Liza, and thank you, Dan. Dan,
Okay,
you
there are other people who have their hands. Tony,
so Sammy, you want to let Sammy in?
Yeah. Sammy, you're allowed to talk.
Great, thank you. And I live up the street from Liza, and I've seen what they've gone through. So to her point, and I really like the point that Peggy you made about having the Army engineers, the Corps, kind of walk up down the river. I'd love for them to walk up the river. In the original plans, when we looked at the whole plans there, in addition to the road to nowhere, which you guys talked about, is the Winfield Avenue Bridge, which if you've walked by here, you've seen that when it rains a little bit too much, our street floods, down the street floods. Not that it comes to the homes, but it does flood just because debris gets caught in that bridge. That bridge barely lets the water go through, and any branches or anything gets stuck there. Waterworks they'll tell you what happens. They got one car flooded. It always floods. And I know that this bridge has been problematic because there's a little bit of finger pointing of like, Harrison, this is your problem. Harrison, this is your problem. Let me tell you, last year when we were all walking because we were stuck at home, or the year before during the pandemic, we couldn't even get them to remove poison ivy. And there was Mamaroneck said, Harrison, it's your problem. Harrison said, Mamaroneck, it's your problem. We had to go back and forth between the two towns to get them to just come remove the poison ivy off the bridge. And everyone was walking through that bridge. So we know this bridge is not high priority, but the water bends really hard in that area. We all know water likes to go down in a straight line, not a 90-degree angle. And it doesn't matter what we do downstream, this bridge and what it does in that area is just going to continue to be a problem. We're not asking for the bridge to be rebuilt, but what is the cost of the flooding versus the cost of knocking down that bridge? Because
Sammy,
yeah.
Sorry if I may, I live 2 blocks down from you.
Yep.
So I know that bridge extremely well. And what the flood committee has always talked about was removing the road to nowhere and then removing the Winfield Avenue Bridge.
All right.
It has to be done in that order. Otherwise, you're gonna kill everybody downstream.
Yeah, no, exactly.
That was
If it can be
exactly the
done,
plan, was one and then the next.
yeah, as long as it doesn't become either or, right? Like if it's a
No, no,
plan,
no,
like
no,
we just
no.
want to make sure that the plan is followed.
It should be one and then the other one. Total
Fantastic.
agreement. But
Okay.
then again, nobody listens to me, Sammy, so.
Yeah, I know. Neither of us. It's just at some point it's all about risk reward, right? And everyone's trying to figure out where do we, like, again, low hanging fruit, what's the easiest cost, these things. But at some point, if knocking down a bridge, and I'm just going to throw a random number, I have no idea what the cost is. Let's say it's $150,000. Well, the damage that's happening every time, forget Ida, every time it rains a bit too much and
Yeah.
3-4 homes flood, what is
Yep.
the cost there?
I'm with you.
I just like numbers and logic.
And
That's
also
all
the
I'm
bridge-
looking for.
The sides of the bridge are collapsing
Yeah.
for further insult to
Yeah,
injury.
again, so I love the idea of having them walk down the river, but would love them to.
No, the whole river, from it, we should be going from the dam all the way to the harbor.
Love the idea.
Please make sure you stop at my house.
Well,
You bet, Liza.
bring the ladder.
Bring the permit.
Exactly.
Thanks,
Better yet.
Okay, so
All right.
the next person
Tammy.
is Corinne. You're on. Corinne,
I am the architect for Liza's house.
It's Richard Perot.
It's Richard Paroli. And I want to elaborate a little bit on what she said about the problem with the building department. In fact, I'm the architect for the 3 houses at the end of Winfield at the bridge who are all flooded. The problem that Liza is experiencing is going to apply to all of these houses that are in flood zones. And this is not, this is really a building department problem. What's happening is, even though, like in Liza's case, there's no technical need for a variance, because the zoning ordinance says if you're not extending the non-conforming use, you don't need a variance. In spite of that, the building official, who's also the floodplain administrator, Frank Tavalacci, insisted that it go before the zoning board. I suggest that you have a moratorium established if this village engine, I don't know what you call him. What is this guy's position that he's going to be in the office?
village manager.
Okay, village manager. The best thing that you could get from him is to eliminate, when you have these crisis situations like we have with these houses that are flooded, to eliminate the need to go to the zoning board of appeals unless there is a significant violation of the zoning ordinance, and to eliminate having to go to the Board of Architectural Review. The Board of Architectural Review is meaningless. It's not doing anything in any of these towns, and you'll save all of these people
Who are suffering.
at least 2 months in the overall process to get into their house. It doesn't mean that they're going to circumvent the building permitting requirement. They have to comply with the building code. But there's no reason to go for the zoning variances when they're not required. And there's
Richard,
no-
I'm sorry,
Yes.
I raised my house in 2015, so I've been through this process, and I did not need to go to zoning. So there has been no change in the law. That might help your case.
This is not a change in the law. What
I'm
happened
saying
was,
there has been no change, so this might help your
Right.
case, the precedence of me not having to do it.
Thank you
Yes.
very much.
okay, but the thing is, what's happening is he said, even though it technically does not need a variance, the planning consultant told him that it's going to need a variance because now we have this approach of mass and light. So in your case, when you did not need a variance, you didn't need a variance, just like Liza's doesn't need a variance. But he's imposing this in spite of the fact that technically it does not need a variance. And I suspect it's not just this project.
I'm sorry, what was the reason again, Richard?
He told me that the planning consultant told him that even though technically it does not need a variance, he's sending it to that board because the planning consultant said this is going to affect mass and light. Really because,
Mass and light.
why? Because they said the diagram, what's happening is it's raising the height of.
Because you're going to have another 5 feet of
Right.
That's right.
foundation.
Right.
Well, it's 5 feet of foundation and the side yard, which is non-conforming.
I know the house, so I know exactly what you're talking about, but it always was,
Right.
Okay,
right?
that's correct.
So this mass and light thing is where they're hanging their hats, and that's ridiculous.
Of course it is, but that's happening. And
Especially in light of.
I believe it's going to happen to these other 2 projects as well.
Are the other 2 going up as well?
Yes. So this is something that this group can do immediately. That won't just affect one, it'll affect at least
All
these
3.
3 and other houses as well. And I suspect any other house that's in a floodplain, which is not in jurisdiction of the Army Corps of Engineers, it's FEMA, is going to run up into the same problem. So,
Well, anyone in the
Oh.
future will. In the past, they never did.
Right.
yeah, so that's even raising a better question to him. Why on one and not on another?
That's why I'm saying use my house as precedence.
Yes.
Please see if you can help us with this.
I'll do whatever I can do. You want me to come testify? I'll be happy to.
Wonderful.
I did have to go to a architectural review board, though. It was rubber stamped, but I was forced to go to the ARB.
Yeah, I understand. It's not completely unnecessary. All they do today is change this material to that. complete
Didn't say
waste
a
of-
word. They-
Couldn't
they-
this process be expedited in light of the suffering that these people are going through? Just
One would hope.
Yeah.
one would hope.
Okay, so Liza, you're gonna reach out to the village manager. If you have a problem, you'll call Dan Natchez. Peggy, you're gonna see what you can do to help them.
Liza has my contact, whatever you need me to do, Liza.
Okay. All right, well, villagers, thank you very much for, expressing your love for the village, your problems with the village. Thank you. It's great that you came on. All right, so anybody else out there need to say?
No,
say
nobody
their piece?
else's hand is raised at the moment.
Oh, okay, all right. Members, do we have any other business that you want to put on the table?
I just have
Yeah.
one question. How are we going to get minutes on this if Dana wasn't here?
Well, it's recorded, so she can look at the minutes.
That's
And
fine.
yeah, okay, all right.
Okay.
All right, so a motion to end the meeting?
I had a question. One, I mean, I saw the memo come through that we will be getting permits now. I mean, the permit approvals. And
Oh. Right, thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen.
yeah, so what is, I mean, I know we were talking about education. I know, Dan, you found something like or someone found something like a association, and those courses cost money. So that's my question, and they seem to need to be maybe tailored. I mean, for us, right? I mean, I just kind of was wondering what we should, well, would the village be willing to vote to have some kind of stipend so we could take courses if they cost money?
Dan and I actually had a conversation about this morning. And Dan recommended that I go on the planning board's website and pull down their requirements, which I actually did. And use that as a sort of a beginning. And I did do that. And the requirements for just filing a building permit or a short environmental assessment form, 2 copies of a proper survey, and I'll distribute this to everybody. Floodplain development application in a flood zone, which would be the only ones we'd be getting. And a base flood elevation certificate. So I then started to do a little bit of digging and while many of our homes that flood are not in a floodway, many of our homes that flood are in the floodway. And I was able to find out that per the DEC, regulations are more strict in a floodway, but I couldn't find any further information. So Dan has given me somebody's name at the DEC, and I'm going to call them and see if I can't find more information out for all of us. Dan, does that seem to be in your knowledge of all of this, the basic needs for an application?
Yeah, the other is you should look at the stormwater chapter.
What do we need to look for there?
This, it's called a SWIP, a Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan.
Okay. So, I think what I'd suggest, because we don't have anything on our plates right now, is in the next few days, I'll send all of what I've gotten out to the committee, what I've been able to dig up. And hopefully I'll be able to get to this person at the DEC before I do that and get more of an idea of what the information is for floodways. And then, and I'll take a look and see what I can find on the stormwater pollution prevention plan. If somebody else has the time, please feel free to look for that as well. And then maybe we should either can we meet as a group to talk about just this, Dan, or not?
2 people can meet, but 3 people needs to be noticed. 3 or more people constitutes a public meeting.
Okay.
So, but I would like to say, Steve, what I sent you, there were a couple of things, but the ones that I thought that would be the most helpful to all of you, were all free. There are others that were charging, but I don't think the topics were meaningful for you.
The free topics weren't meaningful, or for the costing?
Most of the fee, I don't think would be helpful to you. They covered things that if you were an adjudicator, you should know, but they're use board. So it's a question of the things that you need to look at in order to make comments as to concerns or lack of concerns. And that most of those I thought were in the free webinars that, you just could download.
Okay, I'll have to take another look, and I'll see
Okay,
if I
I
can.
may be wrong, because I went through several sites and
Okay.
looked at a lot of the things, and some of them I never even forwarded because they just were not relevant to what I think you all are looking for in terms of basic training.
Because we don't need the entire scope of a planning board's training. We need a very specific little section.
Yeah. So, you're basically looking at, are they building in a flood zone? Well, first of all, shouldn't be building in a floodway. There's a difference between a floodway and a flood zone. Okay, and those are on specific maps by the DEC. Okay, and they've been adopted by the village. Beyond that, you're trying to determine whether or not, this is going to aggravate flooding or not aggravate flooding. Whether, it makes sense, whether there are proper controls, are they building at the right elevation?
Breakaway walls?
Well, that's all part of the construction, but the question is, what are they building, where are they building it, and how are they building it?
And we also need to understand the setbacks from a floodway, which nobody has been able to answer yet.
Okay, well, call Rebecca, she can give you a quick.
But that's something else we really need to focus on.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dan, the other thing I wanted to ask about was, I know we were talking about the old Dan Salete, and I also saw it from about the 572 Van Ranst. Are either of those going to have permits or have permits already, or just kind of where are those now?
The answer is I don't know, but you can go on the website if these are in front of the planning board or the zoning board, and it will tell you where they are.
The Dan Salete building file was sent back to the building department because they didn't have their proper information. So we have to see if
So it was sent back to the applicant,
So we have to, well, it was sent back to the building department to go back to the applicant. So that might be something, Steve, if you could check and let us know if it's
Okay.
gone back to planning in the interim.
Okay, so if it, let me ask you, because if it went to them and it went back, are we gonna get a look then at some, because it went back?
It may have crossed before our,
Mhm.
before we were made
If,
official.
if it hasn't yet, I guess.
Yeah, and we should.
Mhm.
But one of the other things on that, on that application that was called out was they were seeking a variance to build less than 2 feet above the base flood elevation. So that's why we need to be sure we've got elevation, base flood elevation certificates and actually check that. I think that falls within our purview, doesn't it, Dan?
well, it's in your purview anything is in your purview to take a look at. And it's in your purview to make whatever comments you want. But you're commenting in effect like anybody in the public that's of interest.
Advisory board. Yeah.
Yeah.
But at least we go on record.
Yes.
Okay, that's all I know also that, I know last month I mentioned about that, the Murphy moratorium for building in the flood zone, and I know when you, Dan, you mentioned nothing happened on that. Is that still the case, that nothing?
It's on the work session. We haven't gotten to it.
Okay,
The work sessions are very long and very intense.
okay, I'm done.
All right, great. Thank you. That was good.
But for the record, this committee did recommend that moratorium in our memo in September.
You did.
Yes,
Right, but then the memo that we sent later, we didn't have total consensus from our group, so we didn't put it in.
but
But
it was suggested at the time.
yeah, it was, absolutely.
If it's the consensus of the committee to do so, then put it in and send it again. If it's not, then don't. That's up to you.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a month ago, so I don't think it's anything.
We can bring it up again next month.
Yeah, we can.
Oh, we're good.
Okay, so now a motion to close. Second, yeah. Everybody
Who
in
made the
favor?
motion and who seconded it?
Okay, thank you. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, villagers.
Tony,
Yes,
who
Dan.
made the motion and who seconded it?
Okay, sorry.
I
So
made the motion.
was seconded by
seconded.
I'll
Stephen
second.
Glenner and Elsa. I did. Okay,
Okay.
okay. All right, meeting's over. Thank you all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Thank you
public.
all.